On the night of August 2nd, 2006, a 32-year-old attorney named Robert Eric Wone finished a late meeting in downtown Washington, D.C., and walked a few blocks to a row house on Swan Street in DuPont Circle. He had arranged to spend the night there, a favor from an old college friend, so he could be close to his office in the morning. 79 minutes after he walked through the front door, a 911 call was placed from inside the house.
We had someone in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody.
Okay, somebody's inside the house?
I don't know. Someone is bleeding in our house. He's a friend of ours. He was spending the night with us.
Who was the person that stabbed him?
I don't know.
Robert Wone had been stabbed 3 times in the chest. He was pronounced dead at 12:24 a.m. on August 3rd. The 3 men inside the house that night, Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward, told investigators an intruder had broken in and killed him.
Robert Wone, a 32-year-old lawyer, decided to spend the night with 3 friends. 79 minutes after arriving, one of his friends called 911 saying Wone had been stabbed.
There were no signs of forced entry. There were no signs of a struggle. Despite 3 stab wounds to the chest, fatal wounds, wounds that should have produced significant bleeding, the body on the pull-out sofa bed appeared unusually clean for a fatal stabbing. The sheets were dry. The blood that should have been at the scene was not there. Police would later allege that Robert Wone had been restrained, incapacitated, sexually assaulted, and murdered inside that house, and that the crime scene may have been cleaned before the 911 call was placed. A knife from the kitchen appeared to have been smeared with blood and placed near the body. A duplicate knife from a set in Dylan Ward's bedroom was missing. Cadaver dogs alerted to a dryer lint trap and a patio drain. And at 11:05 p.m. and 11:07 p.m., 2 emails were drafted on Robert Wone's BlackBerry, at a time when prosecutors believed he was already dead. 4 years later, the 3 men stood trial, not for murder, but for obstruction, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence.
I learned that the 3 guys were Joe Price, Dylan Ward, and Victor Zaborski, and they all lived in the house together. Joe, he was the talker. The whole story was somebody broke in and murdered their friend, Robert, who happened to be staying the night.
The judge acquitted them, but she also told the courtroom, in a ruling that lasted nearly an hour, that she believed the men knew who killed Robert Wone. She simply could not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. No one has ever been charged with the murder of Robert Wone, and the question of what happened inside 1509 Swan Street, in the 79 minutes between a friendly arrival and a dead man on a guest bed, is still without an answer. This is the case of Robert Eric Wone, and this is the open file. Robert Eric Wone was 32 years old when he died. He was a 4th-generation Chinese American, born in Manhattan and raised in Brooklyn. He graduated as valedictorian of his high school class. He studied at the College of William and Mary as a James Monroe Scholar. He earned his law degree with honors from the University of Pennsylvania. He clerked for a federal judge. He worked for 6 years at Covington and Burling, one of Washington's most prestigious law firms. And then, in June 2006, 2 months before his death, he took a position as general counsel for Radio Free Asia. He married Catherine Ellen Yu on June 7th, 2003.
I am gutted that my husband lost his best friend.
Robert was one of those people who was just fun to be around. He had witty things to say. He had insightful thoughts. He was just one of those people who was always good to talk.
They lived together in Oakton, Virginia, a house in the suburbs, the kind of life two professionals build when they are both working hard and looking forward. The marriage was happy. The family, both his and hers, was close. Robert was about to become president of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association. He volunteered. He mentored. He was, by every account from those who knew him, a person who moved through the world with generosity and purpose. The kind of person whose absence leaves a shape that cannot be filled. Eric Holder, the future Attorney General of the United States, who knew Robert through Covington and Burling, called him a kind and gentle man who was killed in the most horrible of ways. The friend Robert called when he needed a place to stay on August 2nd, 2006, was a man named Joseph Price. They had met at William and Mary in 1992. Price was a senior, one a freshman. They moved in the same circles: honor society, student government, the architecture of ambition that forms early and lasts. They had stayed in touch. They were friends. And on the night Robert needed a bed near his office, he called Joe. The house at 1509 Swan Street Northwest was owned by Joseph Price and his domestic partner, Victor Zaborski.
It's hard when you don't know if you're dealing with a suspect, a perpetrator, a witness. Doing that in real time is a real challenge.
Price was a prominent attorney at Arendt Fox, a major Washington law firm. Zaborski worked in marketing. They had been together for years, and they shared their home with a third man, Dylan Ward. Ward was younger. He had previously been in a sexual relationship with Price, a relationship that continued in some form after Price and Zaborski became partners. The three men lived together as what was later described as a polyamorous family unit. It was an arrangement that was not widely known outside their immediate circle, and it was not something they discussed openly. But inside the walls of 1509 Swan Street, it was the structure of their lives. On the evening of August 2nd, 2006, Robert Wone left his office after a late seminar and walked to Swan Street. He arrived at approximately 10:30 p.m. He let himself in, or was let in, and joined the three men inside. He had stayed there before. The familiarity was part of the arrangement. He was not a stranger walking into an unknown house. He was a friend walking into a house where he had been welcomed before. What happened between 10:30 p.m. and 11:49 p.m., those 79 minutes, is the central mystery of this case.
We really know very little from the time he places that call and when the EMTs arrive at 11:54 p.m. The only three people who could tell us that would be Dylan, Joe, and Victor.
Can you just go ahead and tell me what you remember about what happened tonight?
Robert was coming over. He was working late and wanted to just crash at our place.
The three men in the house told a version of events. The physical evidence told a different one. And the gap between those two versions is where Robert Wone died. Neighbors on Swan Street reported hearing a scream during the 11 p.m. newscast before 11:35 p.m. It was later identified as Victor Zaborski's voice. What he screamed and why and at whom has never been fully explained. At 11:49 p.m., Zaborski called 911. He told the dispatcher that a friend, a guest.
Okay, somebody's inside the house.
I don't know. Someone is bleeding in our house. He's a friend of ours. He was spending the night with us.
Who was the person that stabbed him?
I don't know. We think it's an intruder in the house.
The person that stabbed him, is he still in the home?
I don't know.
You don't know who did this?
We have no idea who did this.
Had been stabbed by an intruder. Paramedics arrived at 11:54 p.m. The police arrived shortly after. One of the first things the paramedics noticed, one of the first things anyone noticed, was the behavior of the three men inside the house. Multiple responders later described them as unusually calm. No one was screaming. No one was helping direct the paramedics. No one was doing what people do when a friend has just been stabbed to death in their home. They were composed, collected, the kind of composed that reads, to a first responder who has seen grief and shock and panic before, as something else entirely. Robert Wone was lying on the pull-out sofa bed in the second-floor guest room. He had been stabbed 3 times in the chest. He was pronounced dead at George Washington University Hospital at 12:24 a.m. On August 3rd, Joseph Price called Robert's wife, Kathy, to tell her what had happened. What he said and how he said it is not publicly recorded, but Kathy Wone would later describe the call as the moment her life split in two, the moment she became the widow of a murder victim, and the moment the 3 men in that house became the only witnesses to a crime that would never be solved. The autopsy of Robert Wone revealed injuries that did not match the story the 3 men told. There were 3 stab wounds to the chest, clean, precise, fatal. But there were also puncture marks elsewhere on his body, his neck, his chest, his foot, his hand. These were not defensive wounds, not the kind of marks a person makes when they are fighting off an attacker. They were something else. Investigators later argued that the injuries were consistent with restraint, incapacitation, or both. There were no defensive wounds, none. A man who is stabbed 3 times in the chest, who is conscious and able to move, will fight. He will raise his hands. He will grab at the blade. He will leave marks on his own palms and fingers that tell the story of his final moments. Robert Wone had none of these. His body showed no evidence that he had struggled at all. The lack of defensive wounds led investigators to explore the possibility that Robert Wone had been incapacitated before he was stabbed. A drug like succinylcholine, a substance that paralyzes the muscles while leaving the mind fully conscious, fully aware, fully able to feel everything that is happening, but unable to scream, unable to move, unable to fight. Succinylcholine metabolizes rapidly in the body.
The stories that these 3 guys are peddling to the detectives just doesn't add up. Joe is being arrogant, Victor and Dylan are being kind of quiet, and none of them seem to be all that concerned that their friend was just slaughtered in their house.
You know, I know it may sound fucking crazy, but it is crazy. Someone came in the back of our house, through the back door, got that knife, looking for something to sell or whatever, came upstairs and stabbed the guy, you know, and then took off.
It can be undetectable by the time an autopsy is performed. If it was used, the evidence would have vanished before anyone thought to look for it. The medical examiner did not test for succinylcholine or other exotic paralytic agents. The blood sample that might have answered the question was not preserved. The opportunity to determine whether Robert Wone was conscious and paralyzed while he was stabbed.
None of them could explain all of these needle puncture marks to our satisfaction. In my opinion, some of these needle puncture marks, particularly the one that was right in the center of his chest, were inflicted on Robert pre-mortem, before he would.
A question that goes to the heart of what happened inside that house was lost. 3 stab wounds to the chest, fatal wounds, wounds that would have severed major blood vessels. And yet, the crime scene was remarkably clean. Paramedics and police officers who entered the guest room expected to find what anyone would expect to find at the scene of a fatal stabbing. Blood on the body, blood on the bed, blood on the floor, blood on the walls. Instead, they found a body with almost no visible blood on it, lying on a neatly turned down pull-out bed in a room that showed no signs of a struggle, no signs of violence, no signs that anything had happened at all. When investigators used chemicals and an artificial light source to examine the scene, they found trace blood evidence around where the body had been. Wiped, smeared, cleaned. The blood had been removed, not hidden, not covered, actively removed, washed away by someone who had time and water and access to a drain. Cadaver dogs were brought in. These are dogs trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, the scent of death itself. The dogs were walked through the house. They did not alert to the guest room. They alerted to the dryer lint trap, and they alerted to the patio drain. Prosecutors argued that the implications were significant. Prosecutors theorized that bloodied items may have been washed or dried before police arrived, and someone had washed blood off their own body, or off the body of the victim, on the back patio standing over a drain, letting the water carry the evidence away. 79 minutes. The timeline required that Robert Wone arrive, be incapacitated, be assaulted, be stabbed, and be cleaned, or have the room cleaned around him, in 79 minutes. And when the paramedics arrived, the three men who lived in the house were calm. They were not wet. They were not out of breath. They were not doing any of the things that people do when they have just spent the last hour committing and covering up a murder, which meant either they had not done it, or they had done it so efficiently, so methodically, so carefully, that 79 minutes was all they needed. The knife found near Robert Wone's body came from the kitchen. It was a standard kitchen knife, the kind that comes in a set, the kind that anyone in the house could have accessed. But the blood on the knife was not consistent with a stabbing. Forensic analysis revealed that the blood had been smeared onto the surface of the blade, wiped across it, as though someone had taken the knife and deliberately applied blood to make it look like the murder weapon. The blood had not penetrated the seams and crevices where blood naturally pools when a knife enters a human body. It was on the surface only. It had been placed there. Meanwhile, investigators discovered that a knife was missing from a set in Dylan Ward's bedroom. The knife was the same brand and model as the one found near the body, a duplicate. But the duplicate was gone, and the dimensions of that missing knife, the blade width, the length, were more consistent with the wounds to Robert Wone's body than the kitchen knife that had been left beside him. The theory that emerged was this: Robert Wone had been stabbed with a knife from Dylan Ward's bedroom. After the killing, the killers took a matching knife from the kitchen, smeared it with blood, and placed it near the body to mislead investigators. Then they disposed of the real murder weapon, the knife from Ward's set, in a way that would never be discovered. Prosecutors argued that the kitchen knife may have been a decoy. The real knife was gone, and whoever had planned this, whoever had swapped one knife for another and wiped blood onto a blade that had never touched a body, had done so in the 79 minutes between Robert Wone's arrival and the 911 call, or before, or both. In April 2009, prosecutors disclosed a piece of evidence that changed the way the timeline was understood. 2 emails had been drafted on Robert Wone's BlackBerry on the night of the murder. One was drafted at 11:05 p.m., the second at 11:07 p.m. Both were addressed to his wife Kathy. Neither was ever sent. The timing is significant. If the scream heard by neighbors during the 11 p.m. news was genuinely Victor Zaborski's, and if something had already happened to Robert Wone by then the emails drafted at 11:05 and 11:07 p.m. were drafted after the fact. Prosecutors argued that the drafts may have been created by someone other than Robert Wone in an attempt to alter the timeline, addressed to his wife, in an attempt to create a digital record that said, "He was alive at 11:07. Whatever happened, happened later. We could not have been involved." The defense argued that the emails proved Robert was still alive at 11:07, that he had drafted them himself, that the timeline the prosecution was building could not be correct. But the prosecution's position was simpler and darker. Prosecutors theorized that Robert Wone may already have been incapacitated by that point, and someone in that house was using his BlackBerry to build an alibi. What was in those draft emails has never been made public. Whether they contained a goodnight message or an update on his arrival or something else entirely, only the person who typed them knows, and the person who typed them has never been forced to explain. On October 15th, 2008, more than 2 years after Robert Wone's death, Dylan Ward was arrested in Miami-Dade County, Florida, where he had moved into a home owned by Joseph Price. The charge was obstruction of justice. In November, Price and Zaborski were arrested on the same charge. In December, conspiracy charges were added against all three. The arrest affidavit was extraordinary. It laid out in detail what investigators had concluded, that Robert Wone had been restrained, incapacitated, sexually assaulted and murdered inside 1509 Swan Street. That there existed overwhelming evidence, far in excess of probable cause, that the three men had obstructed justice by altering and orchestrating the crime scene, planting evidence, delaying the reporting of the murder to the authorities, and lying to the police about the true circumstances of the murder. The affidavit also revealed elements of the men's private lives that had not been public. Price and Zaborski were domestic partners. Dylan Ward had been in a sexual relationship with Price. The three lived in what was described as a polyamorous arrangement, and investigators had found that Price maintained a profile on ALT.com, a website specializing in BDSM and sexual fetish practices. The three men denied any sexual relationship with Robert Wone. Wone's family and friends described him as straight and happily married. But the affidavit suggested that something had happened in that house. Investigators believed the events may have involved sexual activity that was never fully explained, something that ended with Robert Wone pinned to a bed and stabbed 3 times in the chest while he was unable to resist. The defense called the affidavit speculation, innuendo, assumptions, and irrelevant inflammatory comments. They maintained their client's innocence, but the charges were filed. And in 2010, the 3 men went to trial. The trial of Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward began on June 17, 2010. It was a bench trial, meaning no jury, just a judge. The charges were conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence, not murder. The prosecution could not prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt, so they did not charge it. None of the 3 defendants testified. Their lawyers argued that the government's case was built on speculation and that there was no physical evidence directly tying their clients to the crimes they were charged with. The prosecution presented the timeline, the clean crime scene, the staged knife, the cadaver dogs, the BlackBerry emails, the calm behavior, the inconsistent statements. On June 29, 2010, Judge Lynn Leibovitz delivered her verdict. She spoke for nearly an hour from the bench, She found each of the three men not guilty of all charges. But then she said something unusual, something that does not often come from a judge after an acquittal. She said she personally believed that the men knew who killed Robert Wone. She believed they had been involved in the events of that night. She believed they had not told the truth about what happened. But the standard in a criminal trial is not what the judge believes. It is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that proof, she said, had not been presented. The three men walked out of the courtroom free. Robert Wone's family walked out of the same courtroom, having heard a judge say she believed there had been a cover-up, and having heard the same judge say there was nothing she could do about it. There is a final piece of this case, a detail that has never been fully explained, that adds to the sense that something was almost uncovered and then deliberately interrupted. 3 months after Robert Wone's death, the house at 1509 Swan Street was burglarized. The burglars were Michael Price, Joseph Price's brother, and an accomplice named Phelps Collins. They took more than $7,000 worth of electronic equipment. In 2007, the Metropolitan Police Department revealed something remarkable. They had been preparing to make an arrest in the one murder case, and the burglary had derailed those plans. The police did not say who they had planned to arrest. They did not say what the charge would have been. They did not say what evidence the burglary had compromised or destroyed.
It was an older couple that religiously watched Maureen Bunyan on the news every single night.
Live from the WJLA Broadcast Center.
Police and federal agents searched a local home and took a suspect into custody.
They said only that they had been close, and that the burglary had changed everything. The charges against Michael Price and Phelps Collins were eventually dropped. No arrest in the one case was ever made, and the question of what the police were about to do, what they were about to uncover, whom they were about to charge, remains unanswered. A burglary committed by the brother of the man whose house Robert Wone died in stopped the investigation at its most critical moment. Whether that was coincidence or sabotage is not known. What is known is that the police have never been that close again. On August 3rd, 2007, 1 year to the day after Robert Wone was pronounced dead, his widow, Kathy, held a press conference to appeal for information. It was her first public comment on the case. She stood at a microphone and asked anyone who knew anything to come forward. Eric Holder stood behind her. He had been advising Kathy on a pro bono basis, a former Covington and Burling partner, a future Attorney General, standing with the widow of a man he had called a kind and gentle man. Holder issued a direct plea to Price, Zaborski, and Ward. You need to ask yourself, have I provided police with all the information I know? They did not respond. In November 2008, Kathy Wone filed a $20 million wrongful death lawsuit against Price, Zaborski, and Ward. The lawsuit alleged negligent failure to rescue Robert after he was injured, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to obstruct the police investigation. On August 3rd, 2011, 5 years to the day after Robert's death, the lawsuit was settled. The terms were confidential. The amount was undisclosed. The three men paid something, agreed to something, signed something, and the civil case was closed. Kathy Wone has since moved on with her life. She remarried. She has said publicly that the lawsuit was primarily an effort to find out what happened to her husband. The settlement gave her money, but it did not give her the one thing she wanted. The men who settled did not confess. They did not explain. They paid an amount no one knows, and then they disappeared into the silence that has surrounded this case from the beginning. The The widow has answers that are not public. The legal system has conclusions it cannot enforce. And the husband, the friend, the lawyer, the valedictorian, the kind and gentle man is still dead. And the 79 minutes that took him are still unexplained. Robert Eric Wone was 32 years old. He walked into a row house on Swan Street at 10:30 p.m. on August 2nd, 2006, and 79 minutes later, he was dead. He was stabbed 3 times in the chest. He did not fight. He did not scream. Or if he did, no one heard it, except the 3 men who were in the house with him. The blood that should have been at the scene was washed away. Prosecutors argued that the knife left beside the body may not have been the actual murder weapon. The real knife, the one that matched the missing blade from Dylan Ward's bedroom, has never been found. 2 emails were drafted on his BlackBerry after he was likely dead. Cadaver dogs alerted to a dryer lint trap and a patio drain. The men in the house were calm when paramedics arrived. They told a story about an intruder. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of a struggle. There was no physical evidence that anyone other than the 3 men who lived there had ever been inside the house that night. Investigators later stated they had been preparing to make an arrest before the burglary disrupted the investigation. And then the house was burglarized by the defendant's brother, and the arrest never happened. And the charges that were eventually filed, obstruction, conspiracy, tampering, were not enough. The judge believed the men knew who killed Robert Wone. She could not convict them. They walked free. Kathy Wone filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit was settled. The settlement is confidential. The money has been paid. The questions have not been answered. 18 years have passed since August 2nd, 2006. The house at 1509 Swan Street is still there. The evidence locker is still full. The case is still open. And somewhere, in the silence between what 3 men said and what the evidence showed, in the gap between what a judge believed and what she could prove, in the 79 minutes between arrival and emergency, the truth of what happened to Robert Eric Wone is still waiting. He was a son. He was a husband. He was a lawyer who represented people who could not represent themselves. And on the night he needed someone to represent him, to speak for him, to tell the truth about what was done to him, the 3 people who were in the room when he died chose silence. Sometimes, in cases like this, the crime is not just the killing. The crime is the silence afterward. The crime is the cleaning. The unanswered questions include the knife investigators believed was missing, the blood prosecutors believed had been cleaned away, and the emails that appeared on Robert Wone's BlackBerry during the disputed timeline. The crime is that the truth has been buried so thoroughly, so carefully, by people who knew exactly what they were doing, that 20 years of investigation have not been able to unearth it. The body was found. The truth was not. And the silence around what happened inside 1509 Swan Street, in those 79 minutes, in that guest room, on that pull-out bed, is still loud.